Taoiseach, can I remind you of these words you delivered in Waterford in July 2017 when you signalled you were the future? You said, "So long as I am Taoiseach, Waterford will not be neglected or forgotten." I remember well the hope that speech inspired, the signal that the vicious perishing unleashed by your predecessor, Enda Kenny's administration, was coming to an end. We surveyed the wreckage of your disastrous hospital group strategy that led to the chaotic asset stripping of our regional hospital system by a parochial Cork. That left us, and still is, the worst funded Model 4 hospital in the country, an outlier with the lowest ratio of staff and beds to citizens and patients of any Model 4. For your information, Taoiseach, by some margin Cork is the best resourced Model 4 in the group. It's odd, we never hear much about the best and the worst resource parts of our public sector. Precious little comparative data is ever made public by your government, in fact. Of course, you know all of this. You know what your successive administrations have done in Waterford and done to Waterford. Likely why in 2011 your party having half of the seats in the South East region, 7 of the 14 available, today you have 2. You know the data on health spending, and you know the efficient and the competent versus the incompetent and the wasteful. You certainly know well run from mismanaged. You are also acutely aware of the politically protected parts of our public sector. Those outside such protections are fair game for the plucking. After 12 years, Taoiseach, I think it is fair to say you also know the shell game of commissioning a report to hide a political decision that you or your government cannot defend. The trouble is, we in Waterford know it too. My question to you, Taoiseach, is will you deliver 24/7 cardiac care to Waterford and the South East region before the end of this government? Will you give a commitment to that? Your government still stands behind the Heritage Report commissioned in 2015. A shoddy and a shocking piece of work that got basic facts completely wrong. In fact, there still remains a typo in the headline title. With Heritage's abysmal efforts blown out of the water, your government commissioned the National Review of Specialist Cardiac Services, which started its work back in 2018, over 5 years ago. 6 months, in fact, after your Waterford will not be neglected speech. 5 years ago, and we've never heard from it again. So, Taoiseach, my question is, when will your government stop protecting the Cork consultants' private practices? And when will the people of Waterford and the surrounds have an equitable 24/7 life-saving standard of emergency cardiac care at University Hospital Waterford?
Thanks, Deputy. I remember that speech well, and I made it in Bosch and Lom on the outskirts of Waterford City at a jobs announcement, and I committed to a number of things happening in Waterford. And I was back there recently. You were with me for some of it, and I was so pleased to see the amount of progress that been made in the 5 or 6 years since then. I said there'd be a focus on getting good jobs, well-paid jobs into Waterford. About 600 IDA jobs have been announced in Waterford in that period, with major investments happening, which you've acknowledged in other forums. I said that we'd finally deliver a university for the South East, and that's done. The Technology University of South East visited only a few weeks ago. We said that we get the North Quays development underway. You were there for the sod turning in the presence of Minister Butler and I not too long ago, a €200 million investment in the South East that will transform that city and make it the vibrant urban centre of the South East that it should be. And I said we'd invest in Waterford Hospital. And we have, the Dunmore wing in particular, which I visited only a few weeks ago. Really impressed to see that. And you know how much things have improved in relation to the emergency department and overcrowding there, palliative care, many other things. The particular thing that you've zeroed in on your question, and that's entirely reasonable, is on the cath lab. When I made that speech in 2017, it didn't exist. There was questions as to whether there would ever be a second cath lab in Waterford. I was in the second cath lab in Waterford a few weeks ago. This government delivered on that and built it, and it's now ready to be used. As things stand, it's expected to be completed in the second quarter of this year, and the hospital has confirmed that extended cardiac service hours for the existing cath lab commence from the 5th of September. And that means the existing cath lab is now open from 8 AM to 8 PM, Monday to Friday, excluding bank holidays. The next step, we're absolutely committed to making this happening, is to make sure that we have a 7-day service, moving 8 to 8, 7 days a week, and then building up to a 24-hour service. Before, we didn't have the infrastructure and we didn't have the staff. We now have the infrastructure. It's now a case of putting all the staff in place and agreeing the rotas and so on. But it does exist. Waterford has a second cath lab. We'll be able to move to a 7-day service next, and then the plan is to move to 24-hour service after that, subject to us being able to get the staffing in place.
Taoiseach, I'm glad to acknowledge that there is a roadmap to get us to 24/7. I think that's a first in this House. But I would point out to you, and yes, I did go and support your visit in Waterford, and as I invited you, if you recall, both to come to Waterford and both to visit University Hospital Waterford, so I was very glad to see you there. But I think, and I did point out to you in private conversation, that we still have very exceptional challenges at the hospital in Waterford, not least the lack of capital expansion. And there's at least 4 projects down there which have been essentially mothballed for the past year, and they are critical in terms of getting services, community services and others off the acute hospital site so that we can expand capacity. And I have been engaged with Minister Donnelly over the past year in terms of trying to drive something in terms of the policy to deliver that expansion. And unfortunately, it's not happening. And Taoiseach, if I can say one thing to you, the Estates Office for the HSE is based in County Kilkenny. And the regional model 4 of the South East is based in Waterford. And I think it's about time that we had an Estates office on the campus in University Hospital Waterford so we can liaise directly with them to understand what is causing all of these delays.
Taoiseach, conclude.
Yeah, thanks, Deputy. I think it's only right to recognise that there has been considerable investment in the hospital in recent years, a 20% increase in staff and a 20% increase in the budget just since this government came to office. We have the new Dunmore wing, which is a really impressive addition to the hospital with extra bed capacity, also extra services in the palliative care wing as well. We finally now have a second cath lab in the hospital, which is great to see and was great to visit it. Given the amount of meetings I'd had about it down the years, it was great to actually see the thing exists, and we can now make proper use of it over the coming months. And I acknowledge, and you're right about this, the hospital needs further investment. The only thing that we're going to see in Waterford is an increasing population, and we're going to see, as is the case in other parts of the country, an ageing population. And we're going to need to see that hospital develop and have more services added there, including additional bed capacity. And that's the kind of thing that I discussed in detail with the clinical team there and the hospital manager when I visited. And I'm determined to work with Minister Donnelly and Minister Donoghue as well to get the funding to make sure that happens.